behavior it believes are socially suboptimal.
That's exactly what I believe in, and that's exactly what I was referring to. It's up to Congress to define those.
And that's what you were writing about.
That's what I'm writing about, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Toomey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's go back for a second to the thesis issue, which some have suggested somehow should be irrelevant. The reason I think it's relevant is Professor Omarova chose to advertise her thesis on her resume right up through 2017. And that's why I asked for it. But Professor Omarova, you didn't reply to my request, but you did give interviews in the media citing the reasons why it shouldn't be relevant, the reasons why it didn't matter, you didn't believe it then, or you don't believe it now, or both. But isn't it true that you waited until this past Friday to inform my staff that you actually don't have a copy of it?
Senator,
It's kind of true-false. Is it true that you informed my staff on Friday that you don't have a copy of it?
I did inform them, yes.
Yeah. It just seems odd that we would have to wait 6 weeks to discover that, oh, you don't have it after all. And it seems odd that you would make all these arguments for why it shouldn't need to be turned over if that's all a moot point. Let me go to this issue of allocation of capital, because I'm pretty sure I heard you say that you support the private allocation of capital. That's what you're saying here before us this morning. But you have cast enormous doubts in so much of what you have said and written. It's very clear you are deeply skeptical about a private allocation of capital, and you think the government would do a better job. It's your quotes. You did a podcast recently, I think it was, and it's called The Banking and Finance, a Law and Political Economy Project. And it was in June of this year. You said, and I quote, "We need to correct the misallocation of money and credit in the U.S. economy, and we need to correct it on a systemic level." End quote. Another quote. So we need to make sure banks channel money and financial resources precisely where, as the nation, as a community, really need it to go. End quote. Another quote. You say, "Why don't we revive a greater public role in the capital markets and financial markets, to a role not just of rulemaker, cop, janitor, but a role of actual market participants?" These are all your words. In that same interview, you said, and I quote, "We need to think about how to change the mindset about how we think about the role of federal government vis-a-vis private business. It's a team sport. And in the team sport, we all win or we all lose under the same circumstances. And you know, every team requires a captain, and so the federal government should step into that role and should become the captain in terms of allocation of resources. And I think that what the government needs to do is it needs to step into the private market operations, right, in order to align the incentives of individual corporations with the interest of the public," end quote. That's a lengthy quote, and I did it to provide the context, the repeated context in which you are deeply critical of the idea of a free enterprise system privately allocating capital, and you express a preference for the government allocation of capital. And what worries us is this is not like an idle suggestion that was thrown off the cuff. You've developed a whole framework for how to implement this. This NIA that you conceive of is really meant to be like a government-owned private equity venture to allocate capital in ways that you prefer. And I have to underscore, the powers that you would have, including discretionary powers, are enormous. And when you combine this deep skepticism about private allocation, advocacy of government intervention, advocacy for greater government involvement, and let's get away from the regulators just being referees on the field and have them be more. Remember, I mean, you advocated that the Federal Reserve set prices across our economy by openly buying and selling commodities to manipulate the price to where the Fed wants it to be. And as the head of the OCC, you said you'd only do what's within its legal mandate. The problem is its legal mandate is very broad, and there's a lot that's discretionary. You would get to decide who gets to open a bank and who doesn't. You'd get to decide what kind of loans can be made and which ones can't. You could forbid a bank from a merger. You could forbid a bank from opening new branches. You could create or destroy a whole category of bank charters. You could decide which kinds of loans receive favorable regulatory treatment through the CRA eligibility. And every bank would know that their fate is to a very large degree in your hands, and they would know what your views are about the banking industry, about the private allocation of capital. This is what's so chilling. I think this answers the question of why so many, including community banks, are very, very concerned about where you would take the office of the Comptroller of the currency.